to have you back with us for our second episode of Behind the Door podcast. My name is Ben Burgess, and I am joined in the studio, as always, by Jeremy Hiltz and Brandon Brown. These guys are both veterans of the Maine Department of Corrections and have gone on to do huge things. Jeremy's now the CEO of Recovery Housing of Maine and Recovery Connections of Maine. Brandon, doing time from the ages of 21 to 35, became the first man to ever obtain a master's degree while incarcerated in the Maine Department of Corrections. He now serves as a policy advisor at the Catherine Cutler Institute. He's taught classes at Colby College, and he's also a PhD candidate at George Mason University. These guys are both also huge advocates for reform across the recovery and justice spectrum.
What's going on, everybody? This is our second episode of the Behind the Door podcast. I'm super excited about it. The first one we did, I kind of talked about like things that were important to me and the door and that type of stuff. But Brandon, I want to hear from you. I want you to tell us why you are involved with this podcast, for one thing. It's sort of like your background, because you have a pretty amazing story. It's obviously pretty inspirational to a lot of people, and tell us a little bit about why why you wanted to get interested in this particular thing, and some of the work that you're doing, and a little bit of your journey.
Yeah, it's good, man. I mean, first and foremost, before I even get into my journey, I think the reason I wanted to get involved in this is because I got a crazy-ass friend named Jeremy who's like, I got my prison door. And I still remember that time when you called me. I remember the phone call, and you're like, bro, I got my door. And I was like, what do you mean you got your door? I got my actual prison door. And I think, like, in that moment, I knew that there was something special there. And then just brainstorming about it, I think we came up with some, pretty amazing inspirational ideas for what to do with this, and it definitely falls in line with some of the stuff that I'm trying to do with my life. So I'll probably say long story short, because I say that a lot and then it just becomes like a really long story anyway, so it's like long story slightly less long.
Sorry, we got time.
So when I was 21, we'll go back before that. I was a pretty normal kid. I moved around a lot. That was the least normal part of my childhood. I lived in 4 different states, went to like 7 different schools, went to 3 different high schools, just moving around a lot. And the only time I ever felt like I fit in was with sports, with athletics. So, the only time I ever really knew community when I was growing up was through sports. And every time we would move, I felt like I'd fit in, with kids through sports. And that part of the story is only important because when I was 18 years old, I had moved back to Maine from New Hampshire, where I was going to high school, and moved back up here to play basketball. And first practice of my senior year just completely destroyed my knee, blew my knee out. So, I had dreams of playing college ball, and at that point, kind of like all my dreams felt like they were getting flushed down the toilet, and I didn't really have a backup plan. I had no plan B. And so my life just took like this really awkward turn after that. So, that's kind of where my story starts. I had never drank, I had never smoked weed, I had never really done anything, that my peers were doing before that time, because I was so dedicated to sports and basketball. So, basically, I tore my ACL, my meniscus, had to get knee surgery, had some problems at home, ended up leaving home when I was 18, had to transfer schools halfway through my senior year, and just, my life started to unwind a little bit. So for a 3-year period between 18 and 21, I was just, completely changed who I wanted to be in the world. So I was running around in the streets, selling drugs, and, just adopted like a whole different mentality and lifestyle. And eventually that mentality resulted in me getting into a situation one night where I hurt somebody very bad. And so, 21 years old, I get arrested for elevated aggravated assault, and then I end up getting indicted on attempted murder.
Well, let me ask you something about that. Like, you're like you say, you're 21 years old. You get arrested for a pretty serious crime. Like, what's going through your mind as a 21-year-old kid that's kind of bounced around throughout his life? What's like going through your mind when you're sitting in, I'm assuming the county jail, waiting to go to court and stuff. Like, what are you thinking is going to happen for you when you get to the county?
Yeah, it's honestly like kind of tough to talk about because I can look back now. I'm almost 37 years old, and I see how irrational I was as a 21-year-old, right? And so at the time when I was arrested, the night everything happened, like I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel bad. Like I felt like, okay, I got in this situation, and my 21-year-old self was like, I handled business. I did what I had to do. I did what anybody would have done in that circumstance. And so, I was sitting in the county jail waiting for the whole process to play out. Basically, like I'm good. I just assumed that I was going to be good. I wasn't even. I never envisioned.
You didn't even realize that you were about to go upstate.
No, I didn't understand the severity of what was going on even a little bit. And I was, like I tell people all the time when I talk about my story, I was a punk. Like this is the easiest way to put it. Like I thought I was the toughest shit in the world, and I just. When everything happened, like I said, I kind of went to the police station that night when I got arrested, and I think I called my dad and everything happened, and I just said, here's what happened. I got jumped. I ended up shooting somebody. I don't know what's next, and I sat up in the county for a little while. I ended up getting bailed out, and went through almost a year and a half waiting for trial. And literally that whole time, the whole year and a half, I was, it's sad to talk about, but my mind was like, I'm definitely not going to be found guilty of anything. And more than anything else, I just want my gun back. Like that was my mentality for that time. Yeah. And so, next part of the story is, I go to trial, I lose, I get 27, all but 17 years.
So you went straight to a jury trial.
Yeah, I went to a trial. There was no pleading out for me. I was in that space where I was like, number one, because I was a punk, I didn't feel bad about what I did, because I felt like it was justified. And to make things worse, my lawyer was basically telling me that it was justified by law. Self-defense, the witness statements and everything say that, that you were assaulted first and that you responded. So, I was going through the whole process like, worst case scenario, maybe I get like some minor charge with some, time served or community service type of situation. And that definitely wasn't the case at all. My trial was a disaster. My lawyer was a disaster. I think myself and my family and my friends kind of watched everything unfold. That there's this narrative spun during my trial that this was somehow a revenge thing, which it, 100% wasn't. I take accountability for everything that happened and my role in it, but I also have to acknowledge that the way that my trial was about two storytellers and who could tell the best story, not who could tell the most accurate story, not who could tell the most honest story, just who could tell the jury the best story. And the prosecution definitely, did their thing on that and told a story that made me look like, somebody who was out seeking revenge, but that was never the case. I just got in a difficult situation that night where I should have known better. There was a lot of recklessness involved. So, I ended up going to trial, and I was found guilty of 2 of 3 of my charges, and I received a 27, all but 17-year prison sentence when I was 22 years old. Actually, I think I just turned 23 at the time.
How did that land with you?
Oh, I was numb. I remember even after being found guilty, I sat in county for 4 or 5 months waiting for my sentencing hearing. And I remember still being a little bit delusional. Like, my lawyer's telling me, you have all these mitigating factors, and we're going to appeal, we're going to do all this and all that. But, she was basically preparing me, you might get 6 years. You might get, 8 years. 6 to 8 years, I think, is the range that you might be looking at. And when I heard 6 to 8 years, I was like, that's my whole life. You know what I mean?
Right.
6 to 8 years in prison was inconceivable to me because I hadn't even been an adult for.
Yeah, because you're still like a child.
Yeah, as a kid, I was 23 in the county jail.
Now, since this is sort of looking at the perspective of it, from you're at today. But how do you think the system, as a 21-year-old? I think a 21-year-old is still childhood.
Oh, for sure.
At this point, looking back on, how do you think the system sort of shaped this sentence and this thing, and like what else do you think could have happened to have a different, like, positive outcome?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, like, later parts of my story, when I talk about the importance and value of education for me while I was incarcerated, but that all came because I was able to look back at my experience through the trial phase and the sentencing phase of things. And I realized in hindsight that because this is a storytelling system, that we're not actually trying to get at the truth. We're not actually trying to get at accountability. We're not actually trying to repair anything that happens, especially in instances of violent crime like mine. And so for me, when I was going through the process, I'm out on bail for like a year and a half, and the whole time all I'm thinking about is, how can I tell this story to make myself look not guilty? It's obvious that I did what I did. That was never a mystery. But for me, it was like, okay, how can I shift blame to other people? And on the other side, for the person that I harmed and for his community and his friends, and the prosecution side of things was like, how can we tell the story to make it look as bad for him as possible? Because the only thing that we believe in this country is that punishing somebody is justice, right? So their role in storytelling was to just make sure I get found guilty and give me as much time in prison as possible. And mine was the opposite: do what I need to do to be found not guilty, or mitigate how much time I'll spend in prison. So it fostered a lot of resentment in me throughout the process, right? Where I was justifying what I had done instead of actually thinking about the harm that I committed. I was justifying, like I was like, oh, this person deserved this, and I was fully in my rights to do what I did, instead of evaluating where my life had been leading me for the last few years. And so,
sure,
as a young person, the system is teaching me that that's how it's supposed to be. That you're supposed to tell the story to be found not guilty and blame everybody but yourself. And then you get found guilty, and now it's like, oh shit, now I have to find a way to take accountability to get the lowest sentence possible, but it wasn't real.
So really what I'm hearing you say is that, like, this process was not about the truth or the fact of the matter or what would be right for Brandon as a young man or the victim. Mm-hmm. It was really more about, like, who can paint a better picture, or who can paint a good picture about and then the prosecutor and the judge, and like that side of it, they can feel good that they had done their jobs.
And I'm not even sure that they care about feeling good, right? I think it is a job, so you have to perform. And I think that's what I realized, is that the prosecutor in my case was it was performative. Like, there were certain things that happened during my trial that definitely, when you take an objective look at it, you're like, man, that's really wrong how that case was tried. And it's because, like everybody in life, we're trying to climb that ladder. We're trying to be successful.
Sure.
We're trying to get to the next part, and it's a competitive adversarial system that we have. And so the part that really, like, breaks my heart the most looking back is, we have, even as young people and as regular citizens, we believe that the system is designed to, like, pursue justice for the sake of victims. And one of the really transformative parts of my life was when I was in prison, and I realized, like, man, the system discarded my victim like trash, the same way that it did me, right? So I got this sentence, I go off to prison, and then what happens to victims after that part? Like,
he doesn't get no help.
No, he doesn't get no help. The prosecutor's not calling him and checking on him after making him all these promises, and saying, "Oh, I care about you so much, and we're gonna argue for all this time because that's what he deserves." And I realized, like, later years of my life while I was in prison, like, we don't actually genuinely ask as society or as players in the system what people deserve. And, like, what I know now is people deserve to heal. Right, and that's, like, victims deserve to heal from crime, but also we understand that hurt people and broken people come into the system, and that our prison systems and our mental health systems and these other systems that are in line with it are literally funneled by systems of poverty and racism and all these other things. And so anybody who's, like, disillusioned to the fact that people, especially young people who come into the system, have faced a lot of trauma and adversity in their lives,
Right.
and just boils it always down to personal responsibility, is like actively seeking to not see the truth.
I mean, what I've seen, and you're sort of an example of that, right? Like as you said, that you had been bouncing around, you know what I mean? Like you had other problems going on in your life before this happened to you. We literally treat the system treats trauma with systemic trauma, right? That just perpetuates. The people that are most vulnerable to incarceration are people who have had previous traumatic experiences, you know. But so you get to the prison, you get your sentence, you go through this trial, you get to the sentence, and I'm sure it's for a 22-year-old kid entering into the system, into the state prison system, right? So it's like, it's not like the system is age appropriate. Like you're locked up with people that have been in prison their whole lives. You're locked up with people that are doing a year in prison. You're locked up with, you know what I mean? Like just this sort of a fishbowl of a mix of different things that are going on inside those walls. But like, you know, what was the, like, before you really, because I'm sure, like, you were there, and then there was an adjustment period for you. Now, did you find yourself in trouble, or, like, things weren't going that well when you first got to the prison, while you were, like you were saying, like, accepting or trying to take responsibility for what happened for you?
Honestly, I think for me, my journey is a little bit unique because, you know, I got this time, and it was like whatever day of the week it was. Let's say it was like let's say it was like a Wednesday. You know, I got sentenced at like 5 o'clock in the evening, and I remember hearing the numbers when the judge is reading them, and then I remember I had a courtroom full of people, friends and family, who were there supporting me, which for me was also like a pivotal moment for me, because I was 18 to 21 living the life I was living, just like feeling completely alone, you know what I mean? Like,
and then you're in the courtroom,
and then I'm in the courtroom,
you had the support,
and I'm there for a serious thing, and I have all these people literally packed. They actually had to change my courtroom to a bigger courtroom because they couldn't fit the people that showed up to support me.
Right.
And I'll literally never forget, you know, as long as I live, that when the judge said that I'll serve 17 years, there was this collective gasp. You know what I mean? Like everybody all at once, like recoiled from that.
Because I don't even think no one there, or probably I don't even think your victim was supportive of a 17-year prison sentence.
Well, I think at the time, I think my victim was like, give him 30, give him life, whatever you can get him. You know? But also, you know, at that,
because I know that has changed.
It has changed, yeah. And at that point, you know, like my victim wasn't at my sentencing hearing, and I don't think anybody that, you know, any of his friends or community were there. And which I don't blame them. You know, you're going just to see kind of the circus and the show at that point. But when I got back to the county jail that evening, I was so numb. You know, and I was angry, I was confused, I was like all the things that you could imagine somebody would be at, you know, at 23 years old getting a 17-year prison sentence.
Angry. And
it's more than that. Like the 17 years was what I got to serve, but my sentence was 27, all but 17, 4 years probation, 200 hours community service, $10,000 restitution. Like you're sitting in front of the judge and you're hearing all these things read off to you, and the last thing they say is how much time you're gonna do.
You're hit. You're like,
so I'm
fuck.
like, yeah. So I'm like, man, I don't care about any of that other shit. Probation doesn't matter. Okay, restitution, fine, I'll pay that.
You're talking
eventually.
17 years in a box, man.
And then when he says 17 years, like, I think it wasn't even the time that made me emotional. It was what I heard behind me. When I could hear my sister and my stepmother and my friends and their families all, you know, break down, and you know, I could hear a couple people kind of scream, you know, because it was so shocking. And I got back to my county jail cell, and I just sat there, and I remember just staring at the wall, you know, periodically crying, just trying to make sense of everything. And then like 5:30 the next morning, they came to get me and transported me up to the prison. And so I slept in the car the whole way. So literally, I fell asleep in the like loading bay of Cumberland County Jail, and I woke up in the loading bay of Maine State Prison. And I remember waking up to that reality, like, holy shit, I'm in a whole different world now, right? And so immediately as I'm going through the intake process, like, all the prison stereotypes are playing in my head, you know what I mean? I'm like, okay, I'm making my plan. Like, I'm just gonna fuck somebody up right away.
Like you're gonna be assaulted immediately.
And, you know, so like I'm playing all that out, and then it's interesting because there's just so many parts of my story that aligned for me when I look back that are not typical for people. So normally when you come to the prison, you go to segregation, and you're waiting to get classified. But when I got to the prison, they didn't have any beds, so they sent me to general population close custody pod to put me on reception for 30 days. So I went right from intake to a regular just a regular pod.
Right.
But I was locked in my room for, you know, like 40 something, my first 40 days. And the only time that I came out of my room, everybody else was locked in their rooms. And it was me and like 2 other guys who had come to the prison the same time as me. So like, man, I spent my first couple of days at my window watching, you know. And so here, now we're bringing shit together, right? Because I spent my first couple of days behind the door, just at this window.
So you're just looking out,
looking
at what's going on, trying to figure out like the politics of
watching
it all
people
and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I'm like,
what's what, you know what I mean?
You know, 48 hours in, I'm like, this shit is nothing like you see on TV.
Yeah.
This is nothing like what you think it is.
Right.
And so I had to start sitting with that, like, man, if what I'm looking at is so much different than everything I believed this was going to be, then I got to prepare. Like, I got to kind of reassess. I got to prepare for something different. And it was interesting too, because there was a couple guys in the pod that I knew from the street, you know, so it was just coincidental that I came into the pod where they were.
Yeah.
And so obviously right when I came in, you know, these guys came to my window and I was like, oh shit, I remember you from this or that, whatever the case may be. So I felt like right away I had some people, you know, that were familiar faces, and so it wasn't completely isolating. And so these guys would spend time talking to me, you know, for those 40 days at my window and stuff, you know, telling me about the rundown. This is what you need to do, like get a job right away. That's how you'll get out of here. You know, get off the status that I was on. And then it was interesting because I had a couple other people come to my door that were, you know, like, Maine is small, so every crime is highly publicized, right?
Yeah.
So everybody in that pod knew my case, watched my trial, watched my sentencing. And so oddly enough, I had a few people come up to me that were like, you know, that knew my victim too. And but they were like, yo, we kind of know what those dudes are like out there, him and his friends, and you know, you definitely got fucked over with how much time you got. That's crazy. So I felt like this weird, I wasn't trustful, but I felt like a little bit more at ease. Like, okay,
I can do this. I can get
yeah,
through
because
this.
I'm like, man, these guys aren't, and I didn't feel like it was like any predatory shit, you know what I mean? Like, the guys that were coming to my door seemed authentic, and I had some people help me out, you know, with some food and some hygiene and shit. And the guys that I was familiar with from the outs were like, nah, you're cool, like, that guy's a good dude, you don't got to worry about nothing. You know, if he gives you some shit. Somebody gave me a radio, so I had like a radio to listen to and all that. And so basically, man, I went through like my first 2 weeks, and I thought about the fact that, number one, I never believed I would do that full sentence, right? Like, I never once believed that. I always believed, because I watched my trial go down.
You get an appeal.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna win.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know, I'm gonna be here for a few years.
So essentially, what you're saying is that you got off to like sort of you were hopeful about the future. Like, you never really lost like the hope for being free again.
I started out with it, you know what I mean, because of the community and stuff that showed up for me, and I carried that into the prison with me.
Because my whole, you know what I mean, like, and I think that's where our sort of experiences like sort of differ, right? Because I was like in the juvenile system, you know, running away from there. You know, my mentality came in. I went into the prison system like hostile, right? Like, I'm looking for trouble because you know, I wanted to sort of create that what you were talking about, like what it looked like. You know what I'm saying? Like what the stereotype of it was. Like, I was like trying to create that. You know what I mean? So I was like constantly in trouble.
Yeah.
So I think our experiences differed in that way, because I was sort of like resigned to being a convict for my life. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just kind of where it was, and like there was no hope. I knew I was getting like I didn't get no 17 years, right? I was getting these, what they called it when I was doing time was life on the installment plan. You know what I'm saying? So I carried that shit like a badge. You know what I'm saying? Like I was like, I wanted this reputation, and I wanted the sort of negativity to come to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's crazy to think about, because I have thought a lot over the years about, you know, why I was able to show up the way I was able to show up. And like a lot of people are like, oh, you're so strong. And so I'm like, man, that's not the fuck why, right? It has nothing to do with me. I look at the fact, like, when I say that moment when the judge read my sentence is burned in my mind forever, I really mean that, because when I was sitting in that cell my first couple weeks of a 17-year prison sentence, all I could think about was like, why did these people come? Why did all these people show up and like have these nice things to say about me and wrote letters to the judge? And you know, like, these people showed up, and when I realized in that moment, like, man, I've been fucking living the last 3 years like I'm alone, I realized that if I could have just tapped into the people around me, that I probably could have avoided this whole scenario. And so there was this piece of me when I was sitting in that cell in the maximum custody unit, and I was like, I can't let these people down. And that was literally the first thought I had when I was in that cell. And you know, like I had a girlfriend when I got locked up, and so she was obviously, I mean, you know, we're kids and we're in prison, so we become immediately infatuated on a woman. You know what I mean? I was like, it's gonna work out. I'm gonna get my appeal. We're gonna get married and have babies, because you know I was a dumb kid. But the thing that I couldn't stop thinking about was the fact that, man, I can't let these people down. And so, you know, just in some of I had some pretty deep conversations with guys right away through that door. Right, I'm locked in there in the, you know, in the day room, and we're literally on opposite ends of this big ass door, and we had some pretty deep conversations right away. And one thing that somebody had told me was like, you know, there's a couple opportunities here. There's not a lot, but you know, you're doing 17 years, man. You're gonna be here for the long haul, and you got to figure out what that's gonna look like. And so I wrote a letter to the education department, you know, because that's what the guys told me to do. And I was like, listen, I got my high school diploma. I don't know what you can offer me, but I'm here to do 17 years, and I want to do something. You know, I didn't know what it would look like. I had no idea what programs they had available to, you know, for me. I really just wanted to get the fuck out of my room.
So you got a couple different motivating factors here, right? Yeah, because I heard you say, you know, you want to make these people that have been supporting you through this trial and all this stuff, you want to make them proud of you, and then you want to get out of your room. But you know what you did, right? And for those of you who don't know, Brandon, I think, is the only person in the Maine Department of Corrections that ever earned a master's degree while incarcerated.
First, 2 people just literally in the last 5-6 months graduated with their master's degrees.
Nice. So there's 2 more.
2 more have done it since, and there's like 5 more enrolled currently. Yeah.
So when you went down to the education department for the first time, that wasn't like, you weren't like, I'm going to get a master's degree.
Oh,
you were
no.
just like,
I'm just happy
I
to
just want to get out the room and like and have people feel good about what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, for me, I mean, it was like, you know, so here's another thing too. Like, I saw how boring prison was for those 40 days, because like I was bored because I was in my room, but I kind of watched people's routines, and there was a lot of people that literally just, all they did was come out of their room, go to a table with a coffee, deal out the cards, 3 hours later lock in, 2 hours later go to the table.
So you're saying like, you know, these people, I don't want to live that like monotony. You're trying to find a way through that.
I gotta find something
to
to occupy my mind, and so it's interesting, man. So I went to college for like 2 days before prison. I signed up for classes basically just to get a loan.
You got that check, baby.
Yeah, just to get the loan. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so
you got that dough.
Yeah,
See you later.
I showed up for like 2 classes. I bought a computer and some other shit with the money and never went back.
Yeah.
And so, you know, like, college was never in the cards for me outside of playing basketball. You know what I mean? I never cared about education. I was a decent student in high school because I put no effort in and got B's. I did no homework but did good on the tests. You know what I mean? And so I got a letter back after like 35 days in the prison that was like, you know, because you have a high school diploma, that really the only option for you is we have like this experimental college program starting up, and you can come on this day and take like the, you know, the test to figure out if you're going to be accepted into the program. And so I went in. Now, mind you, I had only been in prison at this point for like 5 months. Yeah. When I went to take this, you know, placement test, and I started college 9 months after I got to the prison. So I'm doing a 17-year sentence, and with it, like before my first year had even come up, I was enrolled in 3 college classes in the fall semester. And so that was really the start of my journey, right? Like, I had fallen into like a little bit of a routine before that point. You know, like I was going to the gym, I was getting outside, I was, you know, meeting people that were from my area and stuff, and you know, like connecting with people.
Did you run into like resistance from other people that were doing time with you, like that? You know, how was it like being a student incarcerated? Was there any like resistance, or people kind of, you know, stay away from you or anything like that?
It's weird, man. At first, I felt so much support from the guys in the prison when we first, you know, when my group of guys, my cohort first started the college program, because it was so new. And there was only, I think, like out of 1,000 guys at the prison, 11 of us got accepted into this program when I got accepted. And so I think people were more interested in it and fascinated by it, like, holy shit, you're gonna go to college, that's what's up. And so honestly, man, from like my working on my associates, working on my bachelor's degree, for the most part, the only thing I experienced was a lot of support from my peers. But we did, I mean, like, it was absolute miserable. It was hell, the way the staff used to mess with us, right? The staff did not want us going to college.
The correctional officers.
Yeah, they didn't want us going to college at all.
So the correctional officers didn't want to really support it, but your peers were supportive of you moving forward.
Yeah, so they used to play little games with us, right? Like, they wouldn't open the door. Like, class would start at 1 when rec started, and we'd all be lined up out in the hallway to get to education, and they wouldn't open the door till like 1:15, even though there's like 3 cops right there, all with keys. They just didn't want to open the door, and they wanted to see how we were going to act.
Because you'd be late for class.
Yeah, and so you know how it is. It's a game with them. Like, they want to see how we're going to act, because if somebody bugs out, then they can't shut the whole shit down for the day, for the week, whatever. So
you were like, you know, being a student, you know, since I was released from incarceration, I was a student and earned a degree in the community, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it was tough for me, just the workload and stuff like that. But so not only do you have that stress of just being a regular student, but like you also have stresses of being incarcerated as well. So that was like more of a challenge, I would say. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny because it's a double-edged sword, right? Like, we had a lot of unique challenges as incarcerated students, but we had time. And that's one thing people always say, oh, it must be so easy to go to college because you have all that time on your hands. What else are you going to do? And like, to an extent, I agree with that. Like, yeah, I have a shitload of time. I'm locked in my room. I'm locked in a bathroom. Like, I'm locked in an average sized bathroom for like 13 hours a day. So yeah, I have time, but what people don't realize is that, like, that time is not just blank time. You also have the weight of all of your life's decisions and mistakes, and the environment that you're in weighing down on you every minute that you're in there. So, you know, I had the gift of time, but I also had to do a lot of work to learn how to use that time, right? Because
even like no, if there was disciplinary things that had happened to you, say you get a write-up for whatever, would that have implications on your status as a student?
Absolutely, yeah. Because the program that we were like when I first started, it was a gift. Right, so Doris Buffett, for those of you who don't know, is Warren Buffett's sister, invested tens of millions of dollars in prison education across 3 states, I think, and Maine was one of them. And so because it was a program that was a gift, the people who ran it, you know, on behalf of Doris and on behalf of the university, we had a code of conduct we had to sign. So if you got a disciplinary, you would get kicked out of the program, depending on how serious it was. One of them? Yeah, depending on how serious the
Right.
the infraction was, you might get suspended for a little bit. You might get kicked out completely and have to reapply. You might get banned. And so for me, it's another thing to answer the question that you started with. Like, my focus once I got into the college program was like, I got to stay out of everything.
Right.
I guess
like, that's what I was getting.
Yeah, like I can't get in trouble, because also for me, semester number 1 was like, my brain was working, and I was being treated like a human being in that classroom. The teachers that were coming in from
So you found a little bit of an escape.
yeah, and I found some community with. I had a really good bond with the guys that I started college with too, because we were all out of the game for a while, right? And then showed up, to the prison, got in college, and we were able to lean on each other to study and figure things out. So I had a good little community. I had teachers that treated me like a human being. They didn't I didn't walk in the room and feel like they were afraid of me or judging me. And so I really latched onto that and attached to it. And then I'm experiencing the complete opposite outside of the classroom, where every staff member treats me like a complete piece of shit, like everywhere you go.
Now, let me ask you a question. So, obviously, the administration of the prison supported the education. So I just want to, they must have, because they it's like sort of allowing this stuff in. And
yeah, they supported it to an extent, right? Because you've got a lady giving you millions and millions of dollars to run this program, and what are you going to say no? The prison would look so bad if they said no, and so they supported it to an extent, but one of the really important parts of my journey is when I realized that all the barriers that existed for us to get our education, like the barriers of how staff would be able to fuck with us. And we would complain we'd up the chain, right? We'd complain to our teachers, we'd complain to the people who ran the program on the university side, we'd complain to education staff in the prison, and it would go all the way up to top leadership, and nothing would ever change. Because nobody wanted to tell the officers, hey, don't fuck with those guys because they're students, because then that takes away the fact that we're also prisoners.
Well, see, so I look at, because I never really had an opportunity to go to school. I never really got any good jobs while I was there. It was always this other thing, and I think in a lot of ways that you and we come from sort of different eras in this particular prison, right? And so from what I've seen, and I might be wrong because you experienced it, right? But what I've seen in my work, continuous work, since I got out, going back in there, I've definitely seen a shift in the way in particular, the Maine Department of Corrections works. It seems like in a lot of ways there is. From the commissioner, Randall Liberty, it seems like they with the earned living unit for some of these longtime guys that he had implemented, and then just sort of the way the language that's used is, and at a community level, the probation officers has completely changed their mentality. I got locked up one time for 18 months for smoking weed. You know what I mean? So, and then 10 months of that time, I was in the Supermax prison, right?
Yeah.
So things have certainly changed a lot from when I was younger till now, right? But I just want to clarify that. So the administration is doing their thing out in Augusta, right? They have a vision of what they want to change, but it seems to me that the correctional officers that are in the units and on the floor and that have been around for a while are resistant
to the change.
That is happening. So there's in some ways there's okay, you can do this, but there's a disconnect from the way the suit and ties up in Augusta are handling things to the uniformed officers that are in the prison.
And that's one of the things you always hear, right? When these changes are coming from the top, you always hear line officers saying, these people make the rules, but they don't ever step foot in here. They don't know what it's like. And one thing thing that definitely happens in the Maine Department of Corrections is a lot of line staff try to exaggerate the danger of the job. Like, they're not in here dealing with the animals that we have to deal with, putting their life on the line, like as if our prison is like Sing Sing or Rikers Island or some shit. That it's not. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a prison. It's a maximum security prison. Violence happens, but like, there's this huge disconnect, and part of that, you know, it comes down to, and we'll get into this in later episodes, I imagine, is how these people are trained, right? They're trained to view you as subhuman in order to justify the fact that they lock you in a cage every single day of your life, and then they go home, right? And that they have complete control over your life, you know. So part of the training that historically, you know, correctional officers receive is literally, it's like the same as training soldiers to go to war, right? To look at us as the enemy, as less than human, as justifying this really disgusting, inhumane treatment that you get when you're in prison, which, to flash back to what you were saying earlier, is trauma, right? It is just layers and layers of sustained trauma while you're in prison because you're being treated as subhuman. And
the other thing that I've seen since being, you know, over the years of doing this work is like, you know, they were, you know, when I was locked up, there was correctional officers that would like, you know, it was sort of torturous out there. You know, at the Supermax, they do things. They'd be the first one to put their hands on you, this, that, and now it seems like they're the ones, because it's been, you know what I mean, I've been out 15 years, right? So they're career correctional officers, right? And they're the ones that are being promoted to leadership around the prison system, right? And sometimes I go, man, like I see a guy and I can remember him putting the black gloves on, ready to tune somebody up, right? Yeah. And the guys that are with the hardest and those guys are the ones now that sort of are like running the prison now. Yeah. It's like, how can so I can see where, you know, you get a progressive administration in there. It's going to be difficult to translate that progression into the minds of a correctional officer that's been there 30 years.
Yeah, who doesn't. All they know is
the way they've been trained.
They know
is what's been ingrained in them.
And when you talk about people having a sustained attitude and belief of what corrections looks like when it's that really adversarial, dehumanizing, you know, type of work, to like, we're talking about undoing 10, 20, 30 years of learning and training. And that's why there's such a resistance to, you know, like these culture shifts that we're seeing. And you know, we're seeing some of it nationwide too, and that's, you know, because people are starting to pay more attention, and that's why this podcast, the whole concept of Behind the Door, is so important, because we're seeing the changes, but we're not seeing them comprehensively, and that's what we're really trying to do, is like open the door, shine a light on what's going on, what's working and what's not, because like you said, we come from different areas. You got out within, I think, like a month of me going in,
right? And
so you came through this system, and then I came through this system, and like collectively together we can track like that progression and see what's working and what's not. And you know, I struggle sometimes because I'm not the type of person that will ever say prison saved my life, or, you know, everything that's good that happened to me in my life, it came as a result of what I was able to do in prison.
Sure.
And a lot of times people are like, oh, it's good that you went to prison, because where would you be otherwise? And like, yeah, I'll keep it real with you. Would I have gone to college if I didn't go to prison? Fuck no. That wasn't even a blip on my radar. But I also can identify that, you know, 13 years that I spent in prison was extremely traumatic for a lot of different reasons. I just got lucky to find some ways to cope with that trauma through education and through self-discovery.
And to be honest, this is what I know, man, is that like, so you're the first guy that got a master's degree up there, right? You started school right out the gate, right? But the problem, right, is like you're like a gem, right? Like you're like this unicorn that comes through there, right? Like you were able to, you know, you have your faculties about you. You're a smart guy. You know what I'm saying? You have some confidence in yourself. You know what I mean? Like you hadn't really been down the substance use road, like really, you know, developed addiction issues and stuff like that. But like on the other side of that, though, there's guys in there, because I know one of the things that happened during your time was sort of earned privileges, levels, things like that, right?
Yeah.
And what I know is that there's guys in there that have mental health issues that like can't do what you did because they don't have the like you're like one of the reasons I connected with you, because your mind's on a different level at lots of times, right? There's a lot of guys in there that, like, even if they have the same opportunity as you, are not going to get a master's degree in prison because they're not because it's just, and it's not their fault, right?
No, they need the help. They need the comprehensive mental health help and the comprehensive substance use help and all these things that, like, we've historically never provided people. We know that our prisons in the United States of America are the number one warehouses for people with mental health related issues with and like even worse, acute mental health issues.
Right, like it's serious,
severe ones. And so, we've never had a treatment model. One of the things that I really focused on during my educational journey was really tracking like the history of of crime and punishment and criminology. And we went through this nothing works paradigm in the United States of America, where like literally courts and researchers and people in society believed that nothing works in prison to rehabilitate somebody. All you can do is lock them up. So we're throwing people with these issues into prison and warehousing them. And I think that you're 100% right. When we don't actually provide them with what they need, then there's a lot of people that, to no fault of their own, and not because they're not intelligent enough, not because they can't function enough, but because they're not getting the treatment they need to actually
give the opportunity,
to level out, to even seize that opportunity. And that's one thing I noticed when I was in prison too, is like, man, I'm like, every day I felt like I was getting smarter. But also, just for the record, the most dangerous inmate in the eyes of a staff person and administrator is a smart inmate, right? Yeah. The most dangerous inmate is a curious inmate. And so even though, we talked about, like, I didn't get in any trouble my first few years, I never got in any trouble for, I never got caught for a fight. You know what I mean? I never used any substances when I was in prison, except one time, and that's a story for another day. That's the reason why I didn't after that. I smoked some weed one time and I was bugging out. I didn't, if I gambled, I could pay my debts. Like, I didn't get into a lot of the typical trouble that people will get into in prison. And so I didn't start getting into trouble until education became like my thing,
because right? you had something to fight it back with,
and I started realizing, like, when I was getting my education, I was like, man, my experience in the system is fucked, right? Like, what happened during my trial, what happened during my sentencing, it's fucked. And that means that I'm not the only person to experience that, which means this is a system. So I started thinking systemically. And then, another long story for another day, I got asked if I would join the NAACP, which, I ultimately ended up doing, and being a board member, and eventually became the president of the NAACP, because for me it was like, man, this is an outlet to challenge the system about all the broken shit that I'm seeing. And again, because the only thing they hate more than a regular inmate is an inmate who's asking them questions. Mm-hmm. And so I became very good at asking questions. And then like, I've always, even since I was a young kid, been the type of person that, like, I'm a critical thinker, and so when you ask questions of, like, staff in prison, the response is, shut the fuck up.
Shut up.
Shut up, inmate. You know what I mean? Mouth. I'm not going to answer that question, go lock in your room. And so anytime that we would be asking questions and we would get that treatment, I'll be like, all right, no doubt. And then I'll go read policy, and then I'll go write letters, and then I would find new ways to ask the same questions to people who mattered more. And that stirred the pot a lot for me. I experienced a lot of...
Your shit stir.
Yeah, so I got a lot of write-ups for shit I didn't do, or for the petty policy stuff that they can literally write anybody up for at any given time. Like, you like at prison, when you go to prison, you get this big rule book that outlines all the rules. And, like, I always said that you should get a one-pager instead of a rule book. And the one-pager should say, fuck you, we do what we want.
Sit on your mattress.
Yeah, because, like, that rule book doesn't matter. You could, And so I would get write-ups. I got like, it's funny because after my 13 years was up, I would talk to guys when I was on my way out that would be like, dude, I've been here for the same 13 years as you, and I've done every single stereotypical thing that a prisoner can do. I've been in mad fights. I've stabbed people. I've done drugs every chance I got. I gambled. I've like spit on cops, and you've got 3 times as many write-ups as me. You know, because it got to a point where I was just getting written up to have the message sent that I should shut my mouth. But that's the thing about my experience that's really important, and it's also what I carry out here with me, is, you know, I got to a point where I was like, right is right. And when I got to a point where I accepted while I was in prison and I took responsibility and accountability for what I did and stopped blaming others, then I started realizing that we need to hold the system accountable the same way I hold myself accountable. And you know, it's interesting because as much shit as they put me through, you know, I also found strategically some people at the right time in the right place that did support my desire to get my education beyond my bachelor's degree.
Nice.
And so I decided to study for my master's degree. You know, I wanted to study restorative justice because I recognized how broken our criminal justice system was. But then when I got into it, I realized that really what I want to study is the idea of peace and systems, and why do our systems cause more harm than they fix.
So you know, kind of speaking in that way, like, so you did your time, you did your 13 years, you went to school, you know what I mean, like you got into some tangles with the administration and stuff like that, but now you get out, you apply for home confinement, you get your home confinement. So those of you don't know what that is, like, Brandon was able to take part in the program that got him out of prison early. It just sort of like being on a little bit more strict probation to get you out of prison. So that's why he did 13 instead of the 17 that he was originally sentenced to. But like, so since you've been home, right? Since you got out, what do you do? Like, so you got the master's degree. What are you doing with the master's degree? And like, what are you doing for work now? How did it benefit you?
Yeah, I got lucky. I mean, you know, like, part of the journey of challenging the system, there was a couple of us that were able to actually rewrite the supervised community confinement legislation. So I actually...
So you wrote the legislation
the current law that we have, I actually wrote the law, right? And I worked with a small group of people about, like, brainstorming what it would look like and everything, and then wrote the drafts. And we actually worked with the DOC because, you know, we were able to make them recognize that your reentry is poop. There is no reentry in the state. You deny people home confinement who have done perfect time, and then you let people out who just, you know, to be honest, are jackasses and continue to make you look bad. So, you know, they actually worked with us to, you know, push this bill that I had written, and we got it passed. And then, you know, to their credit as well, the current leadership, they also brought us in to write the policy with them. So, you know, that's why I was able,
and that's what I was talking about. Like this, they do progress.
Yeah,
like the administration have done some pretty progressive things, and you know, so I think there's two sides of that piece of it, right? Like, this system is very hard to navigate, but like, there are some pretty progressive people in our state right now.
A little bit can go a long way, man. Like, you know, one person in an important position can go a long way. And, you know, we'll get into this in the future. I think we have to talk about what are those reforms and progressive things to what is the end. Right.
Well, you know what I mean? What I've always known is that the trouble is that, like, the next governor is going to come with the next administration. And so, like, lots of times, particularly in the prison system, when we have different administrations changing, the work can be undone very, very quickly of anybody in one of those situations, you know? Yeah,
no doubt. I mean, and I think like, I completely agree with that, but I think we do have to ask, you know, what is the end game, even knowing that administrations and stuff change. Like, you know, what are you doing these progressive reforms for if it's not to get people out of prison who deserve to be out of prison? Like, what if we say we've got 1 million? Like, I look at my situation, right? You know, timing wise, my life worked out in a really strange way. I was able to get accepted into my master's program, finish my master's degree right before I left the maximum security prison to go to minimum, and then COVID hit. I had been accepted into a PhD program. Yeah, I had been accepted into a PhD program. I was filing for clemency because it was an in-person program. There was no virtual option. I had gotten accepted. I was arguing for clemency. COVID hit, which put my whole program online, and I got denied clemency, which is a whole nother, situation and story we should talk about one day. What a joke our state is in terms of outlets for people who have transformed their lives. And so I was able to do half my PhD before I came home in my last 2 years. But I look at my scenario and so many of my brothers who are still in that prison, and even my sisters who are in the women's prison who I've come to know, and it's like we have people who are doing these extreme sentences who transform their lives and engage in all the programs that are progressive, all the things that we say we need to do for society, and then they have 20 years left. And so it's like, that's why I say we should always talk about progression is amazing, but to what end? What is the purpose of it? And I think that's something that we'll talk a lot about later, because it also applies to the recovery world, right? It applies to a lot of the things that both you and I are invested and involved and passionate about. And so I came home on that home confinement program, and then I just got honestly like a lot. It's luck. I had a couple people reach out to me to say, hey, we followed your journey while you were in prison, first person to get your master's degree. I did some pretty interesting research while I was in prison that was first of its kind. And they were like, we also know that you've been a voice and to advocate for change, pretty much the whole time that you were in there. And so we want you to do that work with us. And so I started working with Maine Prisoner Advocacy Coalition right when I came out. I think it was like a couple weeks, but I had also created a program for incarcerated youth with a very good friend of mine named Sean Libby while I was in the prison still, and they shut us down while we were doing it while we were in prison. But 10 days after I got out, they let me start volunteering at the youth detention facility in our state. So, those were the couple of things that I got into right away, and everything else just kind of snowballed. I've had the opportunity to teach at Colby College in UMaine Augusta because I got my master's degree. So I've been able to teach about restorative justice, narrative, which is my focus area of my PhD, specifically the way that systems kind of perpetuate narratives for people in society, especially marginalized people. And I've had a lot of other cool opportunities to travel the country, present my research, talk about the broken parts of the system, and really have this conversation that we're having right now, like, why progression is important, but why we have to talk about what's the purpose and why it's important to enlighten people on the history of crime and punishment in prison so that we can understand that it's really doing the same thing it's always done. It is a very, very racist system. We still disproportionately incarcerate people of color at astronomical rates, and then we disguise that by the way that we treat people with mental health issues and substance use issues, because those are colorblind issues too. And so the system is great at camouflaging itself, but it's really important to recognize how systemically flawed all of these processes are.
Word.
And so that's the work that I've been able to get into, and I think.
So it's MPAC. You work for Maine Prison Advocacy Coalition. You work with anybody else?
Yeah, I work for the Center. I'm a consultant with the Center for Effective Public Policy, doing some national level pretrial and community supervision reform stuff. For the last year, I've been working with the Restorative Justice Institute of Maine, diverting young people through restorative justice to be able to stay out of the system. And I also work Maine Prisons. I got a couple other jobs too. I've been on a grant.
Well, you what's that?
I've been working on a grant called the Freedom and Captivity Grant that came through Colby College, where we've been designing curriculums to offer inside the prison and outside here simultaneously, just to talk about abolitionist concepts, right? Like what is liberation, hope, redemption, transformation, these ideas that can really create a more healthy system that can abolish the prison system and create a community.
No, you've also been a professor at a couple local colleges in Maine. What were you teaching over there?
So both schools I taught classes that I had created, right? And so those classes were aimed at really just unpacking the story of criminals and the story of crime in our country. So, you know, a big foundation on focusing with race, gender, and, you know, socioeconomic status, and really getting people to understand that the roots of our prison system really exist with our country's roots in slavery and racism, and that we've evolved that system, but it's still producing the same results, and just tracking how stories work to get people to support a broken system, right? So that's really kind of the crux of what the 3 classes that I've taught have been about. You know, each one took a little different spin on it, but it was a great experience. I mean, I taught young people at Colby College that really soaked it up, and I feel like it made a difference in their lives. Because
man, I you know, when I'm listening to you talk, Brandon, I sit back and I'm like, man, I feel grateful that we've connected and that we're able to like kind of just have this conversation, because your story is like it's amazing. So really what you just recapped really is like you go to prison at 21, you know what I mean? You get a charge, an attempted murder charge, if I'm not mistaken, right? Attempted murder charge, 21 years old, and since that time, you've been able to earn a master's degree, work on a PhD. You're doing advocacy on a state and federal level or national level. Yeah. You taught at colleges. You're putting this together out here because, you know, to start the podcast, just to be willing to be vulnerable and to start having some of these conversations that are rooted in truth. Yeah. The story itself is just it's remarkable. So it's like I get to talk to you. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's you know, there's not many people that come out of that system after that long. There's no doubt, like anybody that goes into the prison system is going to change one way or another. Like you don't go in the front door of a prison sentence and then come out the back door the same person that you went in as. I
mean, in some ways, that's the problem. Is people they go in at 22 and they transform as people, but they come out 10 years later with that 22-year-old mentality, with a bunch of shit.
Yeah, it's changed. Something's changed in there. Yeah. You know what I mean? And you know, and I know I can speak for myself, because just like you said, I got brothers and sisters that are incarcerated right now. Some of them ain't never getting out. Like, and some of them are never gonna have the chance to be incarcerated because they're in the graveyard now, right? And to have you as like a voice of hope around it, you know what I'm saying? It's like somebody that's you know, kind of made it through, and it's like not just going, okay, I just did my time and now I'm all done. You know what I mean? It's like it takes a special person to not forget those folks that are still incarcerated, because the reason I'm doing this is because there are people still locked up in there, and the system is not fair, and particularly around kids. Like, I look at your story and go, you're 21 years old, man. Like 20. I can remember I had already done a prison. So I did my first prison sentence when I was 17 in the adult system, right? I was getting out of prison when I was 21 years old. You were just going in on it. You know what I mean? So like our experiences are different, but at the same time they're the same, because you know, you go behind this door, and there ain't no other feeling. There ain't no other feeling. But when when that door closes on you at night, there ain't no. It doesn't. You can't describe that. You know what I mean? But I'm just like really excited that we're doing this, and that you're really open to talking about what happened with you, but also share your education with us around like the advocacy work that has to be done, the intricate parts of the system that like a lot of people just don't understand. They just don't get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it's important that the reason that I was so amped up about this opportunity too, just about you getting the door and about the conversation about doing this podcast with you, is like I just, when I think about what's behind the door, I could go on for 10 hours talking about it, but I look at my story, I look at your story, and I look at every story in between. And those are the stories that we have to tell about behind the door, because we have all of them sitting behind, and it's about what are we going to pull through the door when it's open, because it really is what a lot of people in society don't understand. It's a choice that you also have to make. You know, are we going to pull people through the door who have been traumatized, who have, you know, done the type of time where they just figure everybody thinks I'm a piece of shit, so I'm going to be that anyway? Or are we going to pull people through the door who, you know, said, no, I'm going to educate myself and transform my life, and I have a community to come home to? Because everything on that spectrum exists, and it's not all about choices that you make in the inside. It's also about opportunities that are available to you and how you internalize stories about yourself that are being told on the other side of the door. And so I'm beyond excited about this podcast. I think people.
Well, one of the things I think is really important here is that, like, you know, if like most of the people in the prison system have a release date, right?
Yeah.
Like most of the people that are in prison are coming home eventually, right? And it's like, as a community member or somebody that's in the community that doesn't have any education around this, well, what type of a person do we want coming out of the prison system that's going to be your neighbor? That's going to be like living next to you. That's going to be like going to the same grocery stores. You going to the same, dropping their kids off at the same daycare as you. Do we want to return people into the community in a dangerous situation?
And just as importantly, you know, and this is something that people find it so hard to do, which is ironic because the numbers keep growing and it keeps affecting more and more people. But how would you want your son, mother,
to be treated,
brother, sister, you know, how would you want that person to experience prison if they found themselves there, and how would you want them to be accepted into the community? So it's like, it's got to be, people have to think of both sides of the coin. Like, number one, how do I want people coming into my community, because I don't want to be, you know, in danger because we're releasing people who have just been traumatized. But also, if it was my loved one, I wouldn't want them to be released traumatized. And those are the questions that we really have to start focusing on when we're talking about this. So.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how far and how deep this thing goes, man. I'm looking forward to bringing on some other voices, some other experiences. Brandon, you're like taking the lead in your area, and you know, we have so many other leaders that are out here. I've never seen, you know, I've been out for a long time now, but I've never seen so many people getting out and doing positive things over the last few years than I have the whole time. You know what I'm saying? Over the last few years, it's just been remarkable how many people are moving forward and like are able to come and talk to us and have that voice be heard.
For sure, man. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank you because you're the legend whose footsteps I'm walking in. You know what I mean? And keep tuning in to Behind the Door, man. We're going to, like Jeremy said, bring some guests on, talk about some really important things. And, you know, it's always a blast.
Peace.
Love you.
Got a lot of shit to work through. Yeah, maybe you don't. I bet you do too. My list of regrets is so long, it's pathetic. Long as the last time I measured. Got to take that line back, I said it. All your ladies out there, do your best.